Do you know what the most famous joke in comic book history is? Some might debate this, but here's my pick. Heard joke once. Man goes to doctor, says he's depressed, says life seems harsh and cruel, says he feels all alone in a threatening world where what lies ahead is vague and uncertain. Doctor says, treatment is simple. Great clown Pagliacci is in town tonight. Go and see him. That should pick you up. Man bursts into tears, says, but doctor, I am Pagliacci. As you likely know, that joke was told by the anti-hero Rorschach in Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' comic series Watchmen. What you also might know is Watchmen is anything but a comedy, despite that famous line and one of its primary characters being named the Comedian. That's pretty fitting. After all, despite their occasional nickname of funny books, comics aren't often that humorous. Why is that though? It's an interesting question, if only because the average person likely expects comics to be designed to amuse and entertain readers. Comics often being humorless is counterintuitive to the expectations many have for them, and that's actually a big reason why they are the way they are now. You see, the origins of the colloquialism funny books come from the early days of the medium in America. Comic strips were the father of comic books, and once the books arrived, nicknames for strips, like funnies and funny papers, followed the art form over to the floppy book market we know today. And comic strips were funny. In fact, many of them still are funny. They're a perfect joke delivery device with their abbreviated nature and sequential art style, with sequential art being a fancy term for comics, or art told in a sequence. While comic books were still designed as pure entertainment well into the existence of the book format, with Marvel Comics famously working banter in with the brawn of its characters in almost equal doses, eventually, the audience for the books matured and the comics didn't. This led to the public perception that comics were juvenile, and what's a storytelling medium to do if people believe it's just for kids? It resists? This perception helped trigger an evolution in comics across the board. Some creators, frustrated by the childish superhero stories, created more mature, absurd works as comics. That's comics with an X at the end, or as alternative comics. The graphic novel, a bastion of more esteemed, widely acceptable comic book storytelling, sprouted to life in Will Eisner's 1978 comic A Contract with God. Even superheroes got into the act, as the 1970s saw heroes like Green Lantern and Green Arrow tackle topical issues like drug abuse, and the 1980s spawned a rise of adult themes in comics in titles like the aforementioned Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. Comics even won a Pulitzer Prize in 1992, as Art Spiegelman's Mouse took home the big award for letters. With seminal works like those and many others as a guide, a generation in medium began to take the work very seriously, which meant the jokes started to disappear and the stories began to mature across the board. That's not the only reason comics aren't always huge on the humor front. There's also the fact it's not always easy to get a laugh in comics. When jokes work, they work well, but failed jokes often fail hard. There are a lot of reasons for that. Related to the last few points, part of it is a will problem. Many creators approach comics as serious work, with jokes taken away from that tone. Another issue is that comics, unlike its most similar storytelling cousin television, do not have a true motion element, increasing the degree of difficulty. They're also much longer than comic strips, which again, were a perfect length for gags. It can be hard to carry out humor as more than an element over 20 plus pages. Lastly, most comics have creative teams. That means multiple creators, many of whom are matched up for sundry reasons, with complementary skill sets only occasionally being amongst them. Nailing humor requires being on the same page, and that's not always a guarantee. It's doable, of course. You just have to employ the right tactics and techniques to make a comic funny. In fact, despite my breakdown of how comics aren't as amusing as they once were, we're in a high time for humor in the medium. There are a bevy of examples that ably make readers smile and laugh, many of which showcase the keys to make the whole thing work. Take The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, for example. Ryan North, Erica Henderson, and Rico Renzi spent years getting the most essential element to nailing funny bits right: character work. By creating fully realized characters with their own quirks and mannerisms, from the way they speak to how they gesture and move, the team was able to make a comic that consistently would make readers laugh. Henderson's gifts with character acting, especially the expressiveness of her characters' faces and her ability to convey nuanced motion within them, was a boon in particular, as she was able to make the ridiculousness of North's scripts work in a way that few could. That sheer absurdity is another way to generate laughs, as John Layman and Rob Guillory's Chew proved. It was a comic about a federal agent who can take a bite from anything and get a psychic sensation of what happened to it, which he of course uses to solve crimes. We were treated to bonkers ideas like chicken super cops and people with food-based powers like the ability to carve weapons out of chocolate. That sounds ridiculous, of course. It 100% was. That's where their gift really lied, though. Layman and Giller were able to not just create insane situations that make us laugh, but to bake that absurdity into actual, functional narratives. That's rare, and what it takes to really make jokes like theirs stick. Satire is fertile ground for humor as well, especially if it's actively built from the universe it's having a laugh with. Warren Ellis and Stuart Immonen's Next Wave Agents of Hate is a brilliant example of making this work in comics, as Ellis was able to mock superheroes and the silliness at the core of the genre, while Immonen created the perfect complement with his chameleon-like abilities to switch art styles and storytelling gifts, grounding the insane nature of Ellis' scripts. It's a comic that is scathing to superheroes, even as it makes us laugh at them and impressed by how well the title perfects the genre. One easy way around the problem that comes with having multiple storytellers on one title, of course, is to simply have one creator play all the roles. Cartoonists, or those that write and draw their own work, sometimes are far better at bringing humor to life in comics, and that might be because they can write to their own strengths, allowing themselves to execute their own vision that's designed to make people laugh. After all, it's easier to sell a joke when it's your joke. Kate Beaton's phenomenal webcomic turned graphic novel series Hark, A Vagrant, showcases this perfectly. She was able to brilliantly thread the needle between highbrow and lowbrow in her endlessly amusing and often hyper-literate strips, making us cackle more and more with each passing gag. Her ideas and dialogue are essential to her success, but so is her art, as her character acting sells the joke like a comedian's delivery. Speaking of strips, another way to bring the laughs in comics is to employ strip-like panel structures into your larger comic works. In fact, this is an essential element, as using multiple panels for the passage of time or the sequencing of a comedic story beat ties all of the preceding elements I've mentioned together. There are a ton of great examples of this, but two of my favorites are the collaborations between Nick Spencer and Steve Lieber in The Fix and The Superior Foes of Spider-Man. These two creators jive together so well in the way that they blend script and visual storytelling together, especially in 3 to 9 panel bursts. To tell a good joke makes them one of the finest comedic partnerships you can find today. It's often said that comics don't have a budget, and that the only limitation of the medium is the imagination of those making them. That's mostly true. If a person wills it and gives the idea time, comics can be anything, even funny. It just comes down to choice and capability, and getting the right ideas in the right hands and the right comic. Thankfully, the art of the funny book lives on in 2018, as alive as it's ever been.